enough homes. We keep hearing promises from successive governments that we're going to get 300,000 homes a year. But I think what I particularly like to look at is the whole span of 80 years. I'm going to get involved in sort of the celebrations, the remembrance of the people who came back from the war. We had a period for 30 years, major house building.
Yeah.
And then since then, there's a couple of stories, but one of them is we just haven't been building enough. And there's all sorts of reasons, but I'd say we had really good leadership on housing for 30 years, and then it vanished.
So let's have a look. So do you want to? So we've some of your graphs here.
Yeah, just a few.
Now this is going to be tricky for people that are not on YouTube. So what I would suggest, if you're not watching on YouTube, go and watch on YouTube inside property development. But for those of you that, for whatever reason, just
sitting back listening, or
I will do a bit of trying to describe the graphs as well, which is a bit of a weird one. This first one here, we're talking about net additional dwellings. So basically, really, how many additional homes have been built, yeah?
Yeah, and if you look at those stats, you'll see that sometimes it's been as low as like 120,000 was built after the difficulties of the banking crash. The whole house building period was at almost its worst. But what we've got on the graph is we've got significant population increase going on, and obviously there's some focus about who is coming into the country, and a lot of it wasn't about that. We have had significant population growth which has outstretched house building, and this graph particularly looks at the last 25 years, and at no year have we got to 300,000. And if you look at the period when we got close, which was from 2016 through to about the start of lockdown, and actually the construction sector did a wonderful job during lockdown. We've got some other factors in play. We had quite a lot of office to residential conversions, and basically everything in the kitchen sink was being counted, and some of it wasn't of adequate quality, I'd argue. I was a Labour councillor. I believe in what they want to do, both on homelessness and on housing, but was it really wise to promise that we'd try and build 1.5 million homes in 5 years? So we haven't been building enough homes for years and years, particularly since the mid-70s. So that is 50 years ago. And because we haven't been building enough, that then has all sorts of follow-on impacts in terms of the price of homes, the positioning of the big house builders, the damage to a lot of the smaller house building firms. It means that rents have soared, housing prices have soared, all sorts of consequences. But for me, and we'll come back to it later, the people who suffer the most, Paul, are at the bottom, on the bottom rung of the ladder. Some of them have drowned. They're forced to go into temporary accommodation. They can't afford the rents in London or a whole load of other places. Governments have failed. The councils have ducked out. The private sector has done its bit, but it hasn't been given the levers and the incentives to build more.
I tell you what, we're going now. You haven't got this graph, but what I'm going to slip in the graph I bang on about a lot, which is the number of SME developers compared to the number of homes built, which shows the peak of SME developers, smaller house builders, was 1988. As planning got way more complex, the number of those has dwindled, and it continues to dwindle. And I personally think that one of the really important things that needs to happen is we need many more good smaller house builders to help solve the crisis,
On smaller developers, I mean, I live in a part of Cambridge that was built within 30 years. It's a nice part of Cambridge. You've got 4 or 10 different types of houses that create something that's a real quality community. And back in Victorian times and even in the 40s through to the 60s, you had a much more flexibility, access to smaller sites where the small developers can take on 15 homes a year, 25 homes a year. Over 10 years, in the right way, they could roll out a community of 300 homes. And that hasn't happened in the last 20 years.
And not only that, it tended, they were more like bespoke individual designs, a lot more character, typically because they weren't trying to, fit in standard house types. And I'm not particularly having a go at that or those, but when you have got lots of good little developers doing lots of good little stuff, it all builds up to create nice character, I think.
Yeah. You look in parts of London, you look in any cities, including into the 50s. Obviously, the house types change, different, more light into houses, larger footprints. But you have everything on the street. You don't have big car parking lots. You have legibility, permeability. You've just got a place that people can identify as their home when they drive home or get on a bus home.
I know for a fact, lots of fantastic stuff has been done around Cambridge the last few years.
Yeah, you were talking to David Birkbeck.
Yeah, exactly.
We definitely need some of those bigger developments. And what also has failed, particularly in the last 30 years, has been to work with the people who can deliver those big strategic sites so that you've got planning, say, across Cambridgeshire or across Essex or across the southwest, where you say, we're going to go hammer and tongs for those 30 major developments, new versions of Milton Keynes or Peterborough or different cities like we're in Peterborough today. There's got to be delivery on the big scale, but like you said, the smaller builders built well. They built local. You've got a bit of vernacular, a bit of difference. So you wake up and you know which city or town you're in, not like you look out the window and it could be anywhere.
Exactly. So we need all of it, don't we?
Where I think what's missing at the moment is we're going to build 300,000 homes a year. Well, where's the beef? Where's the strategy? What are the different levers? And yes, free up the planning system, but that the whole sector is much more complicated. No reference by government to downs and ups in the market. No thought about exactly what is the combination. So I can't support claiming we're going to build 300,000 unless I can see where the numbers come from.
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, and I'm no massive fan of this government, but I've got to say, fair play to them in terms of the changes they've made to planning, and they've made it quick. Credit where credit's due. Yeah. But there is a lot more, obviously, that still needs solving.
I'm not a full-time economist, but I know that there's a whole range of factors. They've got 20 other dials that they haven't tried to use yet.
Anyway, net additional dwellings last 25 years, there hasn't been enough.
There hasn't, and the population has jumped. So the next slide looks back to two periods. I mentioned after the war, Honorin Bevan didn't just invent the health service or soldier to make it happen. Lots of other people put the ideas together. He was housing minister as well. So you can just imagine the effort that was needed. And we're an anniversary year. It's 80 years since the troops came back, the ones that survived the war. And unlike after the First War, they genuinely did come back to new homes. So I've got an image in mind, a guy called Hector Murdoch bouncing down pathway into a new prefab home in Tulse Hill that was built only 2 months after the war ended with Japan. He'd been a prisoner of the Japanese and suffered, but there was over 10 years, 156,000 factory-built panels onto lorries, building prefabs. Not saying it's the only part of the answer, but what you had from all the way from 1946 to 1976, with a little bit of a tail end, which died, you had successive governments, the prime ministers, the whole governments were committed, particularly with councils, identifying small, big sites, building literally several million council homes in that time, at the same time as understanding that the private sector had to be freed to build. You didn't have that kind of NIMBYism, the kind of parochial view, we don't want any more houses near us. We don't want council houses in particular because we don't know what sort of people live in those. So up until 1976, we were building more and more what are called social rent or affordable rent homes, as well as a really healthy private sector, as well as home prices didn't kind of zoom up. I'm part of a lucky generation at 70. We've banked a load of money out of the housing market. Many 70-year-olds are living in a 3 or 4 bed home with a couple. We've now got a completely different environment for the people who are trying to get on the housing ladder now. So for me, that graph just shows that failure really of governments, and it happened when in the 70s the Labour government was fighting, not unlike today, a really difficult economic environment when in a way, the good times ended in 1976 for the building of social homes. And then you would have all of those builders had a lot more certainty, Paul, because if there was a downturn, if the housing market for buying new homes was down, it stabilised the production of homes and the choice of sites. So people can look around cities across the country and towns and villages, even rural areas, and you can identify the council homes. There's nothing wrong with them. They're very good homes. They're still there. They look as good as they looked 50 years ago. In 1976, basically the tap was turned off on affordable rent housing.
What exactly happened?
I think one of the happy positions was for that government and for Mrs. Thatcher when she took over in 1979 was it looked like housing had been solved. So I think one of the things, every government tries to put off spending money until the next government, not in my term of office. If infrastructure investment is appalling because everybody's so short term. Yeah. But yeah, there was the IMF had rolled in. There's not many people as old as me listening to this, but the position in the 70s was that the government couldn't balance the books without borrowing. And to some extent, the country had lived off the hog for quite a couple of decades. And you'd started with Macmillan with the phrase, people have never had it so good. And we had this really happy period. People were getting better health service, better schools. When I went to university, that was at a time, really, the first time when people from working class backgrounds from a broader range of society and women were actually able to go to university in the 60s and 70s. So you look back, and people do look back as if, oh, it was such a lovely time. But it really genuinely was a time when every 10 years people were better off than the previous 10 years. So I think some of the withdrawal meant that housing suddenly moved from being one of the top 3 priorities to not being there. Then the economy kind of recovered, but if you look at the graph later on, and we've got it all the way up to coming on for sort of 2020, there's virtually no social housing, no council housing. A lot of councils have given away their housing. Peterborough, we're sitting in Peterborough. All of the council housing from the city council was effectively gifted to a local housing association, and they're not the same beast. They're not focusing on homelessness. They want a decent quality of tenant. So there's a disconnect between councils who genuinely were in the front line. And I remember I was a councillor in London in 1980, and I could ring up people and work out a place where I could get an allocation of a home to people. There still was quite a lot of council homes, and inevitably as a councillor you want to be popular, and so it was a feature then that we were able to find homes for people. The tail end of that, if you look at the graph into 1980, was that there were still more council homes. And sadly from 1980 things don't look so good. On this graph, which is Shelter put this together, what had happened in terms of council and low affordable rent homes, the idea that people who couldn't buy had somewhere to live, you can see a sharp change. And so at 1980, instead of there being more homes available, you've got a net fall. I wouldn't have objected to right to buy if 100% of the money had been used to build a home. But it wasn't. And so effectively, in addition to not building enough homes for everybody in the last 45 years since 1980, it's actually gone back. we've gone backwards. I listened to a Tory Lord speak, who used to be a Wandsworth councillor, a couple of months ago, saying, well, we had exactly the same number of homes, Paul. So if it is true that there were still those homes, and people who had paid rent for years earned the privilege of owning it. A lot of them were bought by their children, gave them the money.
So you know what? It's funny enough, actually. Just on yesterday, there was someone posted about this on LinkedIn, and do you think it was a good thing, the whole right to buy thing? And I responded and told exactly that story. Me and my sister, when we left home and started earning a few
I didn't know this, Paul.
Yeah, no, straight up. Me and my sister, when we left home and started earning a few quid, and my mum and dad retired, we bought our council house.
Yeah.
Interestingly, and then obviously when they died, we kept it. We rented it out to the council
for more money.
Well, just market rate, whatever that was at the time, you know.
So I can totally understand, and I can see the politics of it. That effectively, Mrs. Thatcher did liberate people. People who'd thought, no, I'm never going to own a home, had that opportunity. And you can see from the graph that there's been splurges of sales around. So there was a lot of sales early on when she announced it and it got moving. And then a big sales, then a slowdown. And then in the 2000s, in the noughties, then there was a lot of sales. And then there's been another sequence of sales as the discounts increased when Cameron did that in 2010. Yes, those homes still existed, but what it's meant is that a lot of people had to depend on the private rent sector to try and fight for somewhere to live. And in cities where there's big pressure of population, of wealth, like London, that was really bad news for a lot of people on lower incomes. So for the house building sector, not having that continuous replacement of those homes also missed a major opportunity. So we've got a big population growth through all of the last 40 years, and we just haven't got enough homes, particularly for people at the bottom rung of the ladder.
100%. So let's have a look at this next one.
So what that flows into is just looking at exactly who owns homes and how they're being funded. So people who pay rent, particularly like council tenants, over 30 years, you can just about pay off the cost if it was built in a low build cost decade. So if you go, this goes back a bit further before you or I were even imagined. And after the First War, and it didn't really change until the Second War, most people, particularly people on lower incomes, had to rent. And rent isn't bad. In Germany, it works really well. In some countries where housing costs have stayed moderate, that means that rent is really affordable. So, yeah, my partner's son rents a flat in Berlin. It's a good deal. So private rent by itself...
But they've got rent controls, haven't they, I think?
That is true. So you've had all the debate in the last few years about is it Section 21 or anyway, just the ability of landlords to say, you know what, I'm going to move you out. I've got other plans. Yep. And often the other plan is to put it back on the market at 30 or 50% more rent. If we go back 100 years, we've got the private rental sector. 100 years ago, we had under 30% of households owned their own place. And even though there was a lot of social housing being built after the war, what you can see from the graph is if you just roll on from, say, the Second World War through to about 1990, you've actually got a doubling of the number of people who owned their own place. So in theory, we could have had that even continuing up to about 80%. It's not impossible, but as you know, and as I know from a variety of housing transactions during my 50 years as an adult, that the house prices have, in my city in Cambridge, I bought a house for 150,000 in 1994, and that house is now worth 1.5 million. So it's 10 times as much as the price that was paid for it. Thankfully, that doesn't cover the whole country, that level of increase, but it just means that people are actually priced out of buying their own home. And if you look at it, there's actually been a dip from about just sort of 1995 to where we are now, and the big increase again has been in private rental. It's not as big as it was 100 years ago, but you've seen a fall due to the sale of council homes in the social rent, and you've seen the growth of private rent, including 1 in 4 council homes that were sold over the 1980 to 2020 are now private rental homes, and they're not at the same rent; they're at a higher rent. So you've got a much more awkward fight. If you just look at what I see in the graph over the last 20 years, I see basically a war going on where people who want to buy have had major problems. People who want to rent can't find it. There are very good landlords. A lot of people end up renting from people for 30 years. But housing is a bit of a tragedy, and it is now swallowing a far higher percentage of a lot of people's incomes, particularly hardworking, lower-income families.
100%, I agree. And it's interesting. So this graph we're looking at here goes up to 2022, and it'd be interesting. I'm sure somewhere out there, there'll probably be a more up-to-date one.
Yep.
Can absolutely guarantee that this gap will be getting wider in terms of the number of owner-occupied homes will be continuing to go down, and the number of private rented ones will continue to increase.
So I looked at the 2011. I looked, Paul, at the 2011 census data for Cambridge. I looked at 2001. So in 2001, if I recall rightly, I had 15% of people in Cambridge were in private rental, and that went up to sort of more like 22% in 2011. In 2021, it's up to 30%. So if you took, and I regard Cambridge as a lucky city. I call it a city of considerable magic. There's a lot of things going on, and you've got quite a number of people who were lucky enough to be in sort of good manual labour jobs in the 1950s and 60s, and they're very comfortable now. But you've got a complete gap between the people who own their homes and people who are having to compete really tough on the level of rents in a city that's growing quickly.
And just tell me what you think about that, because I know there are people out there that say, oh, everything's changed. Young people don't want to own their own home anymore. They like to be able to be more mobile and move around and blah blah blah. Well, I don't know how true that is, or more if it's a case of not that they don't want to, it's just that they've given up because it's so hard. And they can't. It's just almost impossible to own your own home. Do people really just want to rent? What do you think?
So, yeah, my son has got a shared equity house, and he's paying half of it in rent, and it's worked out really well for him. I just think that there's just not enough housing out there. I look at a picture of people at different levels, rungs on the ladder. Your ability to move from, say, Coventry to Bristol and back to Manchester is going to be much easier if you'd got a foot on the housing ladder. And the meaning of that phrase in money terms is that you've bought your first home, or you've got a massive mortgage. Say in the 1990s, somebody managed to get their equity together, got a deposit, and they took out a mortgage. They've been protected, or at least so. People who own it all, they're in boomland. They've pocketed a lot of upswing. People who at different years, and I'd say the same now, I'd still say to people who can afford to do it, that my experience, your experience, lots of people listening, one of the things that they most remember with satisfaction is when they moved into a bit of owning a bit of a home. It gives you so much more freedom. If you say moving from Coventry to Bristol and you've got a rent, and then later on you've got to move to Manchester, I wouldn't like to be that person. It's just tough. You don't know what you're going to get. The supply has just been so poor.
Okay, so let's have a look at the next one.
If you look at the boom areas, Oxford, Cambridge, Milton Keynes even, and Peterborough's grown quickly, and you look at the income it takes to buy a home, then the affordability. So if you look at the income that it takes to buy a home, this graph basically shows how many years it's going to take of income. It's a comparison of how much people earn, Paul, to the price of the home that they get. So average family incomes might now be, say, average family incomes of 50,000. I'm not saying they are, but quite a lot of people with two incomes are getting 50 or 60,000 pounds. This graph basically says, well, you multiply that by a factor of 10, if for no particular purpose, but just really for the point of saying how affordable it is. Say we take the example of 50,000, and we say we take 2010, then it basically you were earning enough over 10 years to pay for a £300,000 home, mainly on a mortgage. But the point is, going back, what we're talking, just about 30 years ago to the mid-90s, homes were costing 3 times that annual family income.
Yep.
Trying to put it simply, by 2023, well, it was at its worst before lockdown, and the construction sector actually did an amazing job during lockdown, because it was actually building at a good rate. We got a bit more affordability back. I don't believe people who say it doesn't matter how many homes we build, it's always going to be expensive. It's about shortage. So we've changed from it taking 3.5 years family income equivalent to the price of a home back 25, 30 years. 30 years ago, it was 3.5 years. And at the peak in 2021, it was 9 years. So as a multiple also of house prices during that period, what we've just seen is just like housing is just expensive.
You know, over the last 30 odd years, housing has just got increasingly unaffordable.
To buy, to rent, it damages the economy because it means, Paul, that it's really tough to move about. I don't think people want to move. They want to live in a community, or they have children. They create a real nest, and they want to stay roughly where they are. We want to look after our children. So you've then got the factor, Paul, that some people are able to pass on flexible income. I'd say anybody who's getting to my age should be thinking about keeping their capital flexible, because you don't know when your children are going to need it. The wealth that we've got, we're in a much stronger position to help our children than a lot of families. I'd say now, Paul, it's that much harder to get onto the housing ladder for anybody who's under the age of 40 than it was. I mean, it wasn't that difficult going back to the 70s when I first got a share of a home.
And nowadays, well, I wouldn't say it's difficult. I mean, it's almost impossible for lots of people. Certainly, if you haven't got parents that have got a few quid and are going to help you out of a deposit, you know.
So that is a block based on net wealth. So yeah, you've got the issue of couples of 60 years and older who've got 2 or 4 spare bedrooms, but you've also got that inequality, the ability for people to help their children, and the skewing of the house prices because we haven't built enough means that you've got a lot of potential buyers that even at the best prices of the volume house builders, they can't get there. And we've seen what's happened in the twos and fros, the swaying of interest rates. We really need to have an economy that's going to get us back to 3 or 4% interest rates so that people can borrow 70% of the equity to buy a home. So It ain't good at the moment, and it's blocking some of the ambitions of the bigger house builders to build the volumes that the government says that they want built.
So I'll tell you a few other things, just on the sort of general wider what's happening in the market perspective, because
know that far better than me.
One of the things that I'm obviously trying to do is support and encourage more good housing, and in particular more good developers. The biggest growth areas in development are, for reasons we've sort of touched upon really, are build to rent, which I'll do a whole complete show on, because it gets housing created of a certain sort, but I'm not mad on it actually.
Well, I'm interested in Rent Plus, but I know from people that I know, and I know from what I regard as the less than adequate performance of some housing associations on mixed products. I like Rent Plus. I like the opportunity for people to switch their equity over time, and to be in a position to build up a share and hopefully be able to buy a future point. But there's a bunch of products out there which I just think have been missold to people. Stuff that's called anything that's cheaper than full price is called affordable. And there just needs to be more choice. But for me, the people who've really suffered are, say, a coach driver and a woman who's doing quite a really important job in a hospital or in a care home, working their socks off. And in a lot of the country, they're having to pay 40 or 50% out of their income just to get housing.
What's happening at the same time is people are getting squeezed into smaller and smaller spaces, which is why there's been such a boom in HMOs over the last 20 odd years. And also now such a boom in the development sector in co-living, which is basically really... people that do it won't like me saying it, giant HMOs. Now you can make them all sexy and funky and all the rest of it. And bottom line is really people are just getting squeezed into smaller space because stuff's so unaffordable.
They are, but I wasn't around 100 years ago. But reading the books I've read and the accounts of people did. Two families used to share a home. People used to be more in the trade of trying to find somebody who they could share a rental for maybe 20 years. So I think I'm not against co-living and about looking at how you could design homes. It's possible to make homes more efficient. Say, if you did share a bathroom, or you might have a communal kitchen, which might have really plush gear. It's not suddenly going to change. Most people want to have their own spaces, but I think the private rented sector is well organised, and I have no problem with PRS and of new developments in a bunch of locations. As we've talked about, I'm a believer in diversity, which would include modern methods of construction. And I look at some of the flats that have gone up in London. I look at some of the people that are in the market of providing what are modest-sized places for people in their 20s and 30s. And if that does the business, it gives them their own front door. I think there is a trade-off, particularly in the expensive parts of Britain. I know from my own son that they've got a nice house, but they make use of the space in a way that I've never had to worry about. And so some of us have got space like cupboards and lots of bits of spare space, but it is possible to live even better if you organise yourself and you get a really cleverly designed small space. So I am in favour of sort of pocket living type homes in certain environments because they do fit the bill. They give everything that people want, provided that they've got cafes, social facilities, gym, a whole range of other stuff within the neighbourhood. So in Cambridge, there's a lot of intensive building, and I'm not against some of that being fairly compact homes.
So let's have a look at this final little
well, this is just, I don't know when it's going to go out, Paul, but we've just gone through one of the most astonishing periods of time with Trump and his tariffs. What really shook him up was the fact that American bond market started to go a bit pear-shaped, and we suffered that in Britain with the mistakes of trying to batter in a new form of economy which didn't work, and the fright of the markets can last quite a long time. So just looking at interest rates, we were pretty fortunate for a long period of time. I mean, food didn't go up in price much for 10 years between 2015 and the sort of beginning of lockdown. And interest rates, if you look at that graph, were stuck low.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is an interesting one. So if you're not watching online, so this is a graph. So this one goes from January 18 to July 23. A lot of that time, interest rates were fairly low and fairly flat, mortgage rates.
Yeah.
And fairly unprecedented, really. You all know, being older. That was crazy. People just got used to that. I mean, if this went back another 30 odd years, that'd be...
It was up and down.
Up and down.
We had periods with Norman Lamont. We had periods of each of the governments.
15%.
I think one of the reasons we've got so grumpy as a country is, and it's easy for me because I haven't been a leader, but I just think economically we've been so badly led. Anyway, but if you do, as you say, look at that graph, if you actually look at the pinkish line, the new mortgages, because of the fact that if you just look at the fact that people could get mortgages, Paul, cheaper than the mortgages that other people had got before them. So the market in that little halcyon period up until and through lockdown was able to offer mortgages cheaper because of the fact that the belief was that the interest rates were going to change in 20 or 30 years' time. So if you remember Gordon Brown, he was a great one for saying that there'll be no more boom and bust. There was certainly certainty and, to use a phrase, cheap money. And what then happened, and it was probably going to happen a bit anyway, was, as you said, it was a golden period and it was going to come to an end. And it did come to a kind of crashing end, partly because of the Truss government, and suddenly the market didn't see it as rosy anymore. And we've had all sorts of uncertainties like the Ukraine war. We're an isolated economy. We haven't got any stability because we've got to fight our own corner. And then you've got just all sorts of actions that affected fuel and everything and interest rates. No one can predict interest rates, I don't think, for the next 10 years.
This goes up to July 23. And about a year before that is when mortgage rates really started shooting up quite quickly.
They did.
And
people are on 6 or 7% mortgages now.
Yeah.
And this is just, I don't know if this is all the information, but obviously some people could never get those kind of rates of 2 or 2.5% simply because they weren't owning as much of the home. Mortgages for some people were always costing more than 2 or 3%, but now will mortgages come down? I'm reading today Barclays think that the economy's going to be needing a boost. Money gets cheaper when there's a bit of sort of Keynesian sort of investment into the country. So we will see over the next few years. But as you know from being a key person in the Barrett team, the whole pattern of belief of whether people are going to borrow money and buy is also being read by the building sector to say, is this a year to start building more? And will Barrett's and Vistry and
well, it's interesting.
Persimmon shares start rising again?
That was the point I was going to make because, as a developer myself, trying to, sell stuff and struggling to sell it and certainly selling it really slow. It's the same for all developers. I've got lots of mates of developers. I've trained lots of developers. Everyone is struggling to sell stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting jumping back to where we started talking about, improvements to planning. Since Labour government got in, they have made a lot of changes really quickly, all good stuff in terms of speeding things up. But the problem is, I saw some stats the other day about the numbers of planning applications are massively down.
Yeah.
The reason they're massively down is because nearly all developers are in the same boat. They've got stuff that they can't sell or selling slow. So they've got all of their money
they've already got quite a lot of the sites
tied up in stuff.
Yeah.
So the last thing you're going to do is be spending 50, 100, 2, 3, 4, 500 grand on a planning application when you haven't got out of your last deal yet, and you can't actually even see for sure when are you going to get out of it. And before you start thinking about the next one, really.
Well, land is still too expensive, isn't it? So, I mean, going back to the smaller volume builders, if you just take an area like East England or West England, you've got a lot of what they would call rural exception sites. You've got sites that could just be brought forward for affordable rent. You could just say to the landowner, look, we're not going to give you planning permission for open market sale, but we do need 20 affordable rent homes in that village. Is going to cap your expectations on how much you're going to cash in for the land. I don't know the detail, but I'm sure some of the big volume builders have paid more than enough for the land, and that has put quite a albatross around the chances of them getting into a profitable scheme. Don't they have to wait till the market actually starts turning up for people to pay a bit of a premium on what is the base cost for the home? A
lot of this stuff with land values and developers doesn't work the way people think it does, and that's one of the reasons again I wanted to do this.
Yeah, well, you've got some other programs you're going to have to advertise.
Well, we are. Well, let's just talk like land banking, for example, right? It isn't really a thing.
Yeah,
I don't know what you think.
I personally don't think changes to the planning system make much odds. I think it does make a bit, and we've had this parochial NIMBYism where councils have been part of it, and we haven't had enough land allocated. I personally think if you want 50,000 homes in your area in, say, the next 10 years, then you've got to actually put in 70,000 because 20,000 will never come forward. So I think one of the problems is this limit of saying we want 50,000 and they'll all happen on these 15 sites and a lot of Diddy sites, and then it doesn't happen. You know more than me, but I just worry that the economics that's built in, and then we've seen this huge inflation in construction costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes it really difficult for a lot of people. There hasn't been any new government initiative which would actually help people to buy, just as what I would like to see them, and going back to the earlier graphs, I would just like to see the people who are homeless, the councils are spending 1.5 billion on temporary accommodation, 2.5 billion, sorry. Home Office is spending 1.5 billion on their responsibilities for people who need housing. That's 4 billion being spent on temporary accommodation. It's not so bad for travel lodges because they're used heavily, but how can a family with 2 children live in a room for 6 months in a travel lodge and you call that a place to live? So you've got problems both at the top of the market, and you've also got particular problems for those that are struggling because there isn't enough housing. We have failed this generation. There does need to be freeing up of all sorts of housing. And we're coming on to the last picture in this set, but and this scheme didn't actually get built in the end. Small reason was it was a car park, and in the end, the local community said we didn't want to lose it, the Glastonbury car park. Well, so Glastonbury is a real community as well as every summer attracting over 250,000 people. And this was just an example of particularly this scheme, because Glastonbury also attracts a lot of van dwellers. In the southwest, there are a lot of van dwellers in the southwest.
I didn't know you knew that. I was just about to tell you.
Yeah.
This is one of the other things that people, I think, depending on sort of what world you live in, you possibly wouldn't know the amount of people living in vans. Because again, stuff is so unaffordable, they're squeezed into smaller and smaller and smaller space. Loads of people living in vans. Glastonbury's a classic for it. There is whole swathes of areas with people living in vans and caravans. I didn't know that you knew that. Obviously you do. But
I know a bit about the southwest, mate. Effectively, you've got different explosions of problems in different parts of the country. So you've got all of the second homers and the impact that has on the market in holiday areas. Yeah. You've got the van dwellers there. Rough sleepers are only 2% of the homeless problem. They're the tip of the iceberg. So whichever community you're in, except maybe some places in the north where they do genuinely have more homes than are needed, not by much, you've got problems. So going back to the talk originally, that mention of sort of a guy, Hector Murdoch, coming back from the war, where he had managed to fight the Japanese and lived in prison for nearly 3 years, 3.5 years. Prefabs, 156,000 were built. Not the only solution, but that ability with modern methods, panels, ability to put up buildings. And it just happens that in the southwest, like in Bristol, there's just a real flourishing focus on just seeing how we can build clever, smaller buildings.
So for people that have not seen previous episodes with my mate Dave Hughes, did you connect with my mate Dave Hughes?
Yeah, no, I'm really impressed. And as I've said to him, I think we were like twins. That I think there's some really good architects, as well as other people right across the building sector, who recognise the scale of what needs to happen. So I'm with Dave on architects looking at producing more efficient and different versions of buildings, a bit like your co-housing point. The homeless problem isn't going to be solved if we don't also look at transitional housing. So there's these threads of the fact that particularly in the high housing cost areas, we need compact homes. Some of them will only be transitional, but I can't see us sorting out, I'm sorry to say, in my lifetime, I don't see this homeless problem going away, which is a tragedy. We've got 25 years of home building at the cheaper end and probably 40 years at the more costly owner-occupied end. I mean, effectively, this wraps us back, Paul, to the fact that we went off message in the mid-1970s, and we've seen a failure of successive governments. 50 years of governments have failed to create the right environment. I haven't got it in for the house builders, the big ones, because they're responding to an environment. And yeah, people can't rent for a price they can afford. People can't buy. And therefore, there isn't the incentive for people to invest in more housing. We are not short of land. We've got plenty of land. Land has to be more available. We have to plan for more land than the number of homes we need to build every 5 years. And that way we will actually meet the targets a bit better. I'd like to achieve 300,000 homes a year. It can be done. It ain't happening at the moment.
It's not, but let's keep talking and we'll find a way to get closer, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I think what we need is a strategy that actually pulls the various threads together, understands housing economics, and can provide housing for people on each level of income. Plus, get people out of temporary accommodation and travel lodges and give them somewhere decent to live.
Okie dokie. Well, I know we're going to talk more about that on another episode of this. For people that haven't seen the couple of chats I had with my mate Dave Hughes about temporary housing,
and it's good,
and some solutions for that, they should go and check that out and watch the next one of these that I'm going to be doing with you shortly. Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. However experienced you are, you will know that that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly millbank.com/MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff and it will help you get much better deals. For the benefit of anyone listening or watching that might not know you, do you want to give us a quick little mini CV?
Well, I'm 70. I have mainly worked in planning, and before that I loved recycling, going back into the late 1980s. So 20 years training planners, particularly council planners. Didn't know a thing about planning before I began. I learnt a lot. I also tutored an MSc course on affordable housing. I was a councillor for 25 years, leader of a council for 8. My best achievement as a councillor was achieved outside a pub at 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening when, after a bit of haggling, £70 million was committed by Treasury to fund a council housing programme in Cambridge City, and they're now on the 750th home. And they've got further Homes England money thanks to being a really great delivery team. So I've got a passion for affordable housing, and I'm currently working for an outfit called Alia Future Homes. And what we do is we help homeless charities deliver new projects, and partly on cost, partly on ease of delivery, partly because they don't have great in-house building expertise. We focus on what are called supported modular home communities, and we're particularly looking at single homeless people who may have led chaotic lives, transitional homes that we build in communities with the aim that, as has happened in Cambridge, where there are now 6 of these communities, 15 people have moved on in the last 4 years into their own flat. So it's giving people a compact home, somewhere to live, where they can then move on.
I know about lots of stuff you've been involved in over the years. Some excellent housing has been created in and around Cambridge, and I know you've had a lot to do with some of that. Training the planning committees, helping planners really get it.
Some of the planning committees I trained for the Planning Advisory Service, they were bizarre. Some of them, one council, every person on the council could turn up for the planning committee. Another, they did a minded to, and then they made up their mind and did it at the next committee. So thankfully, due to investigation of planning committees and now other challenges, people get a better result.
Yeah. Well, what with recent changes to planning and the whole conversation around planning committees is highly current, but so I think we should do a whole another session on that, because it's massive and it's really important. But I know this time in particular I want to talk about stuff that I know you're into big time. I really love it. It's massively important about solving the housing and homelessness problem, and particularly linked to modern methods of construction as well.
I am a fan of modern methods. It isn't the only route. Obviously there's traditional build, but compact homes, and we started with a development in 2020. It wasn't me, it was my boss. But church land, low cost land, homes that then cost £36,000 a home, verandas, really compact design, a successful community. So in addition to this being very ably led by Jimmy's homeless charity in Cambridge, the guys, because it tends to focus on people who previously were sleeping rough, and there's too many women, including in Peterborough where we are, they support each other. So it's using modular, but modular supported communities, and they have made a real difference.
So I know, again, for people listening rather than watching, we are looking at some pictures of some of these things. So if you can go to Inside Property Development on YouTube, it would be handy, because you can be seeing things rather than having to imagine them.
I hope people do, because whilst this is only a snapshot, we've got 5 different companies around the country who are really pushing boundaries on modular housing. And people will be for or against modular or modern methods, but these are examples of shining success. and they are producing homes for people who are homeless, and they're using the best of design and the quality low energy product.
Yeah, very good. So we're going to have a look at some of these, but before we do, just tell me, how are planners reacting to these?
Let's be direct. I sometimes quite rudely and probably unfairly call them structure bunnies. They do not like new, and it was a challenge in the first few planning applications. They rightly are trying to resist pushing the boundary on national space standards. So we're looking here, and we'll see a few examples, 25 square metres, 30 square metres, and these are not permanent homes. They're getting people off the street. They're young people at 16 to 25 who don't need massive space. And if people were in an HMO, they wouldn't have 25 square metres to themselves. So initially, some obstacles, but now there's something like 100 different planning applications. There have been 6, as I mentioned, in Cambridge. Bristol's been a huge source of innovation, different parts of the country. I think the route has been to show planners in a new area, like we're looking at Leeds. We're not the first to do modular. Clarion and some of the local people, Premier, have done some great schemes. So once you've got overcome sometimes some really unpleasant hostility to homeless people moving into people's area, planners and planning committees have been superb. They realise that what is coming on in the next few pictures is about tackling a massive single homelessness problem. 1625s, over 130,000 people 16 to 25 are either homeless or a major risk. Older people, a lot of people who are homeless, people see rough sleepers, 150,000 households in temporary accommodation. If we're going to get people out of hotel rooms, if we're going to get people off the streets, compact's got to go. It's got to happen.
Absolutely. So it has got to happen. So let's have a look at how you've been making it happen.
Let's look at the layout of basically a layout that was put together by Alia, a social enterprise in Cambridge that also employs teenagers that got nothing out of school. It teaches them construction skills. It's led to a lot of them moving on. What you've got there is you've got 24 square metres. 60% is the living room with a kitchenette, a sofa, a comfortable space. If you imagine people who might have had real difficulties living on the street or they've got chaotic lives, you've got a home they can really manage. In the middle, you've got a shower and a washing machine, and at the back is always going to be a quiet area, and you've got a single bed. And they could just as easily be couples. You could just as easily have 40 square metres, but you've got no wasted space. You go into a typical HMO, about 30% of the space is corridors or stairs or just useless space, and that is where we've sort of made the case to planners as well as funders that this really is the best way you can do it. So there you've got a design that was developed by Alia with others, New Meaning, the local and really impressive social enterprise. And then Hill lifted the idea and they came up with their variation, they improved it, and they've been producing large quantities of these in steel. These ones are largely timber.
So just in case you're not watching, so this is a 26 square metre, one bed modular unit. So it's a rectangular box, well designed, all super efficient, and whilst it might be below the nationally described space standards, which as you mentioned earlier, some planners can get a bit out of shape about. I mean, it's good space, and this is for people that would otherwise be living in a doorway or a tent or a van,
So, that I think I'm going to pop my clogs before we get over the housing emergency. and transitional housing is essential. So you can't have 150,000 households in often substandard, often out of area, often for 6 months in a room or two. So I think the planning system needs to accept, and they need to accept it for younger people who might want a compact home, like pocket living, for instance. So I just think there's room in the market for smaller homes, and these are easy to manage.
And just out of interest, because again, this is the other thing, that planners and councils are going to have to sort out because they're spending billions on people in temporary accommodation.
2.5 billion.
Yeah, it's crazy. Ballpark, how much would one of those cost to build, do you think?
Well, you know that construction inflation's happened. So broadly, Alia were buying them for 36,000 6 years ago, and now you're more talking about 65,000. So when we're looking at projects, we're looking at 60 to 80,000 for the home. Some of them are significantly bigger than these, and 100,000 if you then include all the utilities, the site and related costs. So 100,000 is our target. People say, oh, that's a lot of money, but you're producing what is a fully fitted quality home. You're providing all the bits to go in it. It can be there in a year. So the project we'll come on to, it took just about a year from when we let the tender and now it's built. We've got in another programme a dialogue where I eulogise about prefabs and the off-site building that was part of the solution when I say we had the last housing emergency. So some of the learning is still there. If you look at the picture, and for those that are able to watch it on YouTube, the bottom right picture shows that they actually went into designing the kitchen. You had a fold-down table came off from the wall on the right. You had different forms of kitchen equipment. This was brand new for people. People who lived in slum conditions came into a nice house. So I think one of the ways prefabrication and modern methods has got a major play, and they're in the hotel sector, as you know, and into hospital rooms, is that you don't just look at the rectangle, you actually look right down to what's in it.
And what this is about, so it really is, it paves people that aren't seeing this slide, is that, last time really there was a massive prefabricated housing need and boom was after the Second World War, where a lot of housing did get created really quickly, didn't it?
Bevan didn't just run the health service, he led on housing. What a job. I mean, so I am a Labour person. There might be a bit of warmth in my tone about that government, but they were a proper government. I mean, we may not have been led so well over the last 15, 20 years. They got on. As you can see at the top right-hand corner, this was at Folkestone. Let's have a piece of land. Let's put up 50 homes. I think that is why there is the spirit, as you know and you have shared about from the government, that they want the presumption in favour of development. If we want to sort the housing out, we've got to allocate land, and there's got to be more quick build happening. So this just comes on to two stories. And I've got this phrase, the sort of supported modular communities. There's one on the left, which you'll see a different version of for those following on screen. This is Olive Morris Court in Haringey, 32 modular homes. We've effectively copied the idea for a scheme in Chelmsford. And I'm sad that BT are no longer actively building, but if you go to Cardiff, of course, you could go to the Arms Park and watch a game of rugby, but they've got about 12 different sites where 2 to 4 story modular is helping them. So they don't use travel lodges. They've got, I think they've got capacity for about 300 families as in transitional housing. So I just think 2 story, it makes better use of the land. These are you've got a steel based on the left, and you've got more of a timber construction on the right. Of course, you could make it look a bit better, but essentially these are homes for people that haven't got one. This goes back a couple of years, a bit more. This is a homeless charity inherited. Well, they bought a motel. It had a very bad reputation, I learnt yesterday. It was rented out by the hour, some of the rooms. But essentially, when you can marry a site that's on a road, that's a linear site, then you can do quite a good build. It's got a 20, 30 acre, really mature, high quality woodland behind it. So you've essentially got 2 stories of 12 on each level, split with a community room, and also the gap in the middle is a sort of outdoors space with a lovely view back into the forest. It was opened yesterday, a wonderful charity, inspired by a guy called Rob Saggs, but also a member of his trustees, a guy called Andy, did a stunning job. We filled the gap. Homeless charities don't have expertise. There's an awful lot of things to achieve to produce a project, assisted by Alia and also TSA Riley, who did a stunning job on the project management of the build. They got 1.6 million out of the government. They fundraised over $1 million. They got 350k out of their very impressive Chelmsford City Council. They put together the money for 24 homes, a £3.1 million project, including utility shared rooms and a training room and a really good environment. So all for local people who are single, transitional, so that they can then move on into hopefully a flat from a housing association. But hugely efficient use of that piece of land, and they're going to be moving in from the end of this month.
How long did it take to make that all happen?
Pre-app really important, getting things sorted, but essentially the tender was this time last year. So we tendered April, May of 2024, and as with the usual rush at the end of a project, it was all finished off before the end of March. But it is one of the things about modern methods, in addition to being competitive, particularly in the southern part of Britain compared to traditional build, is just this ability to mobilise. So just like the 156,000 prefabs that were built in 10 years after Honoria and Bevan got that moving, I can't see us getting over the housing tragedy without a significant focus on factory build as part of it.
It's got to happen, isn't it? And well, not only that, and hopefully it will help some of the modular suppliers survive, because, you know, that's not easy for them, is it?
Well, they've got to have the right product. But I mean, government is spending huge sums on temporary accommodation. If they just spent 50% of that on build, then it would pay off in a few years' time. Travel lodges don't come cheap, and the ability then to put people in, and people want to rebuild their lives and they want to be productive again. They can recover their confidence, they can get healthier, they can get friends with their own relations again, and they want to get out to do some work. They don't want to sit indoors all day. Going on to the next one, it's a similar issue for young homeless. So this is a scheme built by a company called MAR, who are another company that are not quite the same anymore, in Hull. But we're talking about 32 flats. Again, compact, but if you're 16 to 25 and you're in London, a flat like this, that's something that they really enjoy moving into. So again, I mean, a hugely impressive charity. They've got big plans in Manchester. They've got a land bank of sites, putting together projects, and Modular is producing a high intensity on what's a pretty small site in Peckham.
So what stage is this one at?
I think they're just about the same, Paul. So again,
that's built, is it?
Yeah, I think they're actually 22 square metres. It's been built, and yeah, it's enabling teenagers. Some people come out of care. I mean, fancy pushing somebody out of care at 17 and saying, you know what, fend for yourself. So there's a lot of human tragedy can be avoided, particularly people who are younger. You know, you and me, we're kind of fixed sometimes in our take on life. But people who are 16 to 18, they really need to be helped. Otherwise, there is brewing trouble. And their bodies fix easier, their minds fix easier. Even if they've had a crap childhood, if they've got a security of somewhere to live, they're able to get out there. About 134,000 is the number for the people 16 to 25 who are either homeless or at serious risk. And those people, their whole lives can be reshaped and they can just move on and do so much more.
Who owns the land on this one?
I think they bought the site. They were helped by one of the richer families in the country, which is why it's called Reuben House. So often, and in some of the other cases, it's council-owned land. So as you know from looking at other projects, councils often own either a building that can be repurposed or a garage site, or a lot of the smaller sites are actually publicly owned sites. So a developer will look for something where they might be able to build a significant number of homes, but underneath the surface, there's maybe 3 or 5 of these sites in that same neighbourhood. So we're doing a site search in Cambridge at the moment, which isn't an easy place to find spare sites, but assisted by Bidwell's and a charity called It Takes a City, we're looking just right across the city. We've already identified 2 that we can think have got good planning, good opportunities. We can build efficiently at low price. And the aim that charity has is to find more. So if you look in London, London has the benefit of top slicing the Homes England money as well. So there's a guy, Tom Copley, who works for the Mayor Sadiq Khan, is doing a stunning job assisting homeless charities, assisting boroughs, but they get the local money that Homes England are now being asked to distribute around the country. So London has got the worst housing crisis, the highest rents, but it has got the ability to, with the Greater London Authority and the boroughs and all the different partners, to be tackling the homeless crisis on small sites. I call Bristol the city that's let 1,000 flowers bloom on modular. A guy, Paul Smith, he's chief executive of Elim Housing Association, inspirational guy. Similarly to Tom Copley, who's a deputy mayor, he was a deputy mayor to Marvin in Bristol, and essentially working with different modular builders. I think there's something like 15 different modular builders, 15 different schemes. So on the left, you've got company Z-Pods, who are very hard-working, clever partner for Ashford. They've developed a car park. They're very busy in Devon. And here you've got trees all around that site on Hope Rise. And I think that is something like 12 homes. It could be more. And again, that's aimed at 16 to 25s, a mixture of people with serious problems and others who are under 25. Really good bit of research. So we've done a lot of research on the Alia Future Homes communities by Cambridge University. They did it. They commissioned it. We didn't ask them. But there's some of these sites have really got very clever analysis about exactly what it's like to live in, and are they the kind of transitional housing, and how has that worked? And on the right there, Integra, who've also got an outfit called More Housing. Metal as the base, but really lovely places indoors. You can see the scale of the windows, thermally high efficient, a little bit sort of like somebody's constructed out of Meccano or Lego, but a very happy community on what was a small car park. We talked about, Paul, the Home Office, and they alone spend £1.5 million on transitional accommodation for different groups that they're responsible for, including the sensitive area of migrants that they provide housing for, but people have got to live. But the HM prisons have produced transitional homes, they cost a fortune. I personally don't rate some of the design, but Algeco built what they were told to build. Each of these cells, and HM Prisons has fitted in 1,200 of these to try and tackle the prison crisis. Each of these has got 300 millimetres, 30 centimetres of concrete to stop people digging out. And they've got probably, I'd say, over-spec'd steel doors. So these cost, and they've got individual heating and air conditioning units to each home, which I think is a bit wrong in use of money, because communal heating and mechanical air recycling and so on could have done the job. So essentially, it's an example just of how prisons are coping, particularly for people who move into these as transitional before they then move out of the prison. So they've already made a progress to get into these. These are smaller. These are about 20 square meters. Yeah, they don't have heat pumps. They don't have solar. They could have been designed a bit better, but it's just a sign that Algeco, who got right across the construction sector, fast food outlets, hospitals, schools, doing some amazing building. And it's just an example of meeting a need. But some of what Algeco know about could just as easily be part of a framework like they had in Ireland for Ukrainians, where we could be building more, and they know what they're doing. So that's steel. And going north into Bonnie, Scotland, there's a charity called Social Bite, and they got the bite word because they also run cafes and provide employment for young people. In my sort of comfortable existence in Cambridge, I don't really know the drugs problem. Of course, I know there's county lines, there are serious drug issues even in every city, but I was surprised to just find out how serious drug abuse is in Scotland. They've got massive problems, and communities really are ending up damaging people who might be as young as 14. So this charity essentially has had a community in Edinburgh of 20 homes for 8 years. They were the inspiration for what Ali has done about using compact homes and about working with homeless charities. And the guy in the middle of one of the pictures is a guy called Josh Littlejohn, and he's a terrier, and he has now raised the funding for 2 communities of 15. So there are 20 in Edinburgh. They're redeveloping that community. They're building 15 in Rutherglen in Glasgow, 15 in Dundee, and these are 22 square metres. They're gems of buildings. You can see, if you look hard at the pictures, you can see that they're using goulam multi-layer timber. They're using timber in about 6 different ways. High quality North Scottish timber, built in Invergordon, north of Inverness, by one of the most inspirational modular builders in the UK.
Who is that? Who's building those?
Ecosystems. So they're part of a radical housing conference that's going on in this year, and they just build what I think is getting right to the top end. And these, I don't know what their current price is, but I'd asked and got a price of about 60 grand. If I just organised my life, I'd really want to live in one of these. I mean, you can see the bedroom. It's got these special shelves. There's a lovely shower, another room. You don't get the full picture of the kitchen, but you can kind of see the surface in the picture with the people in yellow vests. And this is just the best possible use of timber. It's not as flash on the outside, but that's not where people are enjoying the space. And they're designed to be set apart in quite a largish site. The sort of homes that people might, if they could live off-grid or have a holiday home somewhere in Scotland or Wales or the mountains of England, that they want to live. But these provide a safe place. These are for particularly targeted at teenagers that have really got a serious problem with crack cocaine or heroin. And what that amazing charity does is it's actually helping people rebuild, and they can evidence that they've rescued lives. And going back to the earlier example, you've got Modular creating your own front door. God, I never thought I'd have a place with a smart glass front area. I never thought somebody would actually care about me. And why shouldn't people who are sort of still not even able to be adults, they're still forming their views, they're still trying to work out what they really want, have a fresh start. So I just think from the collection of examples, of course you're hearing me as eulogising, but I've got no skin in the game. I just think that you've got examples where Modular or modern methods and the Bristol Housing Festival ran a really good exhibition in the building centre until February this year. And there's plenty of examples. London's got plenty because they've had that extra top slice of money. People who've been able to put projects together in Bristol, in Cardiff, show that this could help. We've got one hell of a housing emergency and homelessness, lists of people of all ages that need somewhere to live.
No, it's massive and it's important stuff.
Well, if anybody sees this, a bit like you rightly talk about the other podcasts, if anybody sees this, if they look out for Lewis Herbert and Alia, what we try to do is we generally try and look for a lower cost site, because we are trying to work within local housing allowances, and we're trying to help homeless charities. We fill a gap because they don't have an in-house people who know a lot about building or planning. So we're always on the search for sites. So we've got a site in Bristol, we've got a site in Leeds, and we've got sites in several other cities. We start with identifying a piece of land. We assess it for planning, we assess it for survey, what's it going to cost. Then we come up with an indicative drawing, and then we are looking for funding and partners. So I think, essentially, I think there's a role for people with small sites. There's a role for councils who've got a housing problem, who might have a piece of land. I mean, there's amazing housing charities out there. And when you look at what Emmaus has done as an organisation with communities, 30 communities around the country, Homeless Link bring together what are about 200 different homeless charities. So, local authorities know that homeless charities, a bit like hospices, they fill a gap for very low cost, and they get virtually no state support. People are very generous, and often one of these projects will get together partly if somebody's willing to put a mere £200,000 into a project. And there are people out there, including who've made enough in life and might have some spare, who will help. But so for us, identify a site or state an interest in getting a project with inventive modern methods going in your town or city, and either we will help or we know somebody who can.
Very good. So do you want to give your contact details?
Yeah, so Lewis Herbert at alia.org.uk, and we've got, so if you look up Alia Future Homes as a website, and I spend too much time on social media, so I do a lot of sharing of best practice on LinkedIn. So if anybody is on LinkedIn, just look out for Lewis Herbert. And as you've talked to Dave Hughes of Hughes Architects, there's a whole bunch of people who are as evangelical as we are. We're not. We don't make any money. We are a charity effectively because the Alia group makes money in different ways, raising bonds, running places, offices. Yeah, we're not the only people out there. There are all sorts of organisations, Housing Justice, the Church of England's got really active. We're basically filling the gap, and we get a lot of pro bono offers. So we're also in the market if people have got skills like planning or project managing a relatively controlled build. There's somebody in your area who might be able to use your skills. Yeah, we had a superb project manager from TSA Riley who produced the 24 homes we saw. He paid a blinder in that. No project simple, as you know. We want to be able to leave behind high quality communities, and it's as important to think about the community as it is about the home. So yeah, if there's anybody listening who thinks, you know what, in my community I could make a contribution, we can find you a charity or a project that would really make a difference.
Thanks, Lewis.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.